Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. Have you ever hesitated to set a boundary with a friend out of fear that it might push them away? Or maybe you found yourself on the receiving end of unspoken expectations, and you're left guessing what your friend truly needs. Today, we are diving deep into boundaries in our friendships. Something I find really unique and beautiful about our friendships is that they are one of the only relationships we have purely by choice. And like I said, that is beautiful, right? Our friend is choosing us, you, me. How special. But I also think that sometimes that freedom can make us hesitant to fully trust. Because why me? And we might end up holding back a little bit. We're subconsciously testing our friends, waiting for them to prove it, that they will show up, that they will listen, that they will come back after we set a boundary. And those unspoken moments where we're waiting for our friends to show up in the ways we want can become silent tests that strain the friendship. But what if setting boundaries didn't have to be a test? What if it was a bridge, a way to deepen the connection and show our friends how to love us better? Back in episode 74, I introduced the idea of small intimacies, the simple ways we let our friends into our lives and allow them to know the real us. Sharing our boundaries is one of those ways. It doesn't have to be big, dramatic moments. It can be as simple as expressing how we need to connect. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by my guest, Zya Be. Zya is the host of Your Hell Yes Life, a podcast for women who dare to live differently. Each episode features a woman boldly living her hell yes, laughing at expectations and creating her own unique path. She is also an artist and an author, inspiring others to courageously question the status quo and blaze their own trails. In our conversation, we'll share our real-life experiences with boundaries and friendships. We'll discuss the importance of taking time to reflect on our personal boundaries and not just following the shoulds of societal expectations. We'll share stories of how we've communicated boundaries up front in small and simple ways, enriching our relationships without the need for those big, dramatic moments. We also delve into navigating those big boundary crossing moments, especially when a pattern has been established and you're like, this has got to change. We even explore the concept of boundaries versus bridges. Now, setting boundaries can actually be a bid for deeper connection, a way of saying, I want to keep being friends with you. Here is the way for us to connect better. And I hope you walk over that bridge to me. So join Zya and me as we explore these ideas, share our stories, and hopefully inspire you to navigate your friendships with a little more openness and authenticity. Let's get into today's episode. Hi, Zya. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm so excited that you're here today.
I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Can you talk just a little bit about what you do, your platform? And then I know we're going to talk about like a bunch of personal things and how we're doing this in our personal life, but tell the listeners a little bit about you.
So talking just about the platform to start with, I do have a podcast called Your Hell Yes Life, or Your Hell Yes Life, actually, is usually the way I say it. And the reason I want to talk about boundaries and the no is, to me, you can't really own your yes unless you're really owning your no. And your hell yes life is not to imply that it's always your best life or that everything is wonderful. It is all about helping women live from their deep inner yes, from their truth, from their intuition, instead of expectations, which again, boundaries is something that will play into this. Of you're focused on somebody else's expectations and somebody else's needs instead of your own. And so that's my mission, is to help women really live their unique life according to what feels right and what they want and need. And then about me, I used to have a corporate career, a consulting business for many, many years. And for many, many years, I wanted to get out of it and to live a life of more meaning. And finally, in 2019, I did walk away from that. And then, without getting into every last step, things transformed. And I went from this very masculine push type of energy that I had in consulting. I was a consultant based in New York originally and then San Francisco. And I wanted to get results and I just, stress and push and make it happen and logic, to now I flipped so far to the other side. I have the podcast. I'm also an abstract artist. I just co-authored an international best-selling book on creativity this year. I've done singing, poetry, all kinds of other things. So I will work on the balance and bringing both of those together, but that's just a little bit of background.
What do they call it? Like a second life? What a pivot. For anybody out there, I mean, this is not related to this podcast exactly like our topic, but for anybody out there who feels like they don't want to be doing what they're doing anymore, what a beautiful example of tapping into something that feels right. And I mean, kind of starting over, but starting over with what you had and like doing something so different. Thanks for sharing your journey, and that for anybody who's out there listening, wishing they could do the same thing.
Yeah, of course. And a lot of people, actually, I'd say most people who are guests on my podcast have done a similar thing where they lived a path that either they thought they wanted at some point or they thought they should, and then had this epiphany of, oh no, I live once and I'm going to start doing something that really lights me up.
I mean, the shoulds. The shoulds is such a great transition into what we're talking about today. I was thinking about it and I was realizing that in the past few years, have gotten much better at boundaries with friends, whether that is because they were asking things of me. But the reason I called out the shoulds is because I think a lot of times I was surpassing boundaries because I felt like I should do that thing, or that's what a good friend would do, or that's how I should show up. And so some of it's putting up boundaries with your friends, but a good piece of boundaries is, I think, just putting up boundaries with yourself, like your own expectations of what it means to be a friend. How do you feel about friendship boundaries in your own life? How do you think you're doing?
I mean, same. This has definitely grown over the years. And one of the reasons I wanted to focus on it today is, we talk about boundaries maybe at work, definitely in relationships, but I don't really hear people bringing it up as much in friendships. And I think a lot of us do have this expectation of, well, a good friend should always be there. So even if you're tired, even if you're drained, even if you're busy, they need me, I should go. And yeah, so over the years, I have gotten much stronger in my intuition, in my needs, in my self-care. Not to say that I don't adore my friends and want to give, but I do it in a way that also aligns with where I am in the moment. And if I cannot give to you and I cannot support you or whatever it is that you're asking of me, yeah, at times, depending on what's going on, maybe I'll bend because you
Yeah,
really
of
need
course.
me and it's not that big a deal for me. But if there are times like I actually just went through a really challenging time and I said, that's it, silence. I will not interact with anybody. And I was clear with people. It wasn't just, I don't like you, but it's, I'm going through something. I need quiet. I'm tuning in. So I totally agree with what you're saying, that it is also, it's setting expectations with ourselves. But again, I'll go back to that deep inner yes. So instead of the head, what should I do? What is a good friend? Their needs are important. And maybe I shouldn't put mine first. It's that deep inner knowing of, oh my God, I'm exhausted and I can't do this. Oh my gosh, this person drains me. And maybe it's not always, oh my gosh, but really tuning into what is that deep feeling around this situation, around this person, and for yourself, and then going from there.
So when you talk about like the deep inner yes, kind of like doing that self-discovery first, figuring that out. I mean, I have my take on this, but I'm curious, like, how do you discover your deep inner yes when it comes to like proactively setting boundaries with friends? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah. I mean, some of them will come in reaction to, like, maybe I'm not a morning person. And so maybe I may not think to tell you, hey, don't text me in the morning, you're going to wake me. And then when that thing comes, it's, oh, okay, now my deep inner yes is I need quiet in the morning and I'm going to say something. So proactive, I think, can sometimes be challenging because you don't know to ask for something until something comes up where you're like, oh, that doesn't feel good. There are some things that you could just generally know about yourself and bring up. Let's say it's a new friend and you make plans. You could say, hey, it really is frustrating when people cancel on me that last minute. If you could please let me know the day before. And so in tapping into that deep inner yes, I think it comes with practice and with being quiet with yourself and just really connecting to yourself and what feels good in this moment and what feels good overall. If you think about different friendships, this one feels better than this one. Why is that? What's going on in that one that feels better to me? I'm curious what your take is. I know this is your show, but since you said you have your take, I'm curious what your take is.
Well, I think very similar to yours. I think that we can sit down and think about the ways we enjoy spending time with people, the ways we enjoy communicating with people, the activities we enjoy doing together. And I know that's going to be slightly different with each individual friendship, but there are probably some kind of overarching ones. So let me think of an example. I get overwhelmed by a bunch of text message, like a bunch of messaging platforms. I'm not very good with that. And I could tell myself I'm a bad friend, or I could just kind of decide up front, like, I'm going to really try my best to reply to everything I can, like one time a day. And if I don't do it for a couple of days, then like I actually have scheduled time on my calendar. That to some people might be really frustrating, but to me, that's like how I figure out how to show up at all versus beating myself up that I'm a bad friend. Another one would be like, I love like hanging out at somebody's house. If I had to pick most nights, I would prefer to hang out on someone's couch or run errands or sit in their car or do something like that than get all fancy and go out. I do love that too, but more often than not, that would be my choice. So the way that I think that's proactive is then, let's say somebody does invite me over to their house. That's a hell yes for me normally. That's like a let's go. And it makes me feel a little less guilty if I don't have the energy to go out and get all dressed up and fancy. Like I feel better saying no because I'm really aware of the places I'm saying yes. I'm not ignoring those. Like I'm giving those credit almost.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And going back to your first point where you said you don't want to text very often. And so maybe it's a few days and it may be frustrating to some. I think that's where a boundary can come up. And you could even just explain exactly what you said. I don't like texting. If it's a few days, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. Just be patient. So that way the person doesn't think, is she mad at me? Is there a problem? Should I be worried? What's going on? They just know, okay, that's just how she rolls. And I'll hear from her when I hear from her.
Yeah, I think it's the communication piece and also knowing like certain things. Again, when it comes to the text messages, like I may not be the best at responding right away. It's when things come in all day and they're like pulling me away from other stuff that I can't. So I try and make a point, right, of like once a day sitting down and kind of replying to all of them. And that for some friends, that might mean they message me in like a group message and individually. And now they're getting like back-to-back responses because that's the moment I've sat down. But on the flip side, I also know that when I am with friends, part of this is when I'm with them, I don't really like to pay that much attention to my phone. And if other people are messaging me, I won't respond. So I know that when I'm with you, I'm really, really present. And I think that makes me feel not better. Not that I should have to feel guilty about my boundary, but sometimes I think it's easier to set a boundary when you're also clear on the places that you are giving that bridge, I guess, like the things you are doing. I wanted to talk a little bit about this boundary and actually how this boundary has shifted. It was not serving me anymore. But if you have gone back, listened to some of the episodes in the archive, I talk about this in episode 40 and episode 54. I have ADHD, and keeping track of messages, especially on multiple platforms, is really a struggle for me. Now, my solution for this was kind of this boundary of I will sit down once a day and I will try and respond to everything. Now, I wasn't even perfect at that, to be quite honest. Sometimes it was a couple days, but it was a way for me to communicate to my friends like, hey, this is really, really overwhelming for me. You can kind of expect this like one mass response. And I went with that boundary for a while. And then I started having these realizations, these thoughts, these reflections that I wanted to feel closer to my friends in the day to day, that I was really great about getting together and sitting down and kind of having these deeper conversations or doing things with friends. But I wasn't having a lot of day-to-day random conversation interaction, sending these like random thoughts, and they weren't sending them to me either. And I just found myself thinking like, well, I want more of that. I miss that. I miss hearing these random details about my friends. And then it hit me that this boundary that I'm really probably going to respond like once a day was probably costing me the random thoughts, interactions that I wanted from my friendships. And I needed to change my boundary. And not only did I need to change my boundary, but I actually had to put work and effort into finding a way around this, into responding quicker, not putting my phone on do not disturb as much, like choosing that I want to be more in the know with my friends about their random things throughout the day. And that meant I needed to rescind my previous boundary and renegotiate this whole thing. And I'm just telling you that story because I do think sometimes we need to set certain boundaries and they may serve us for a really, really, really long time. But we also might set a boundary and then later decide we want to change it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, that comes to what's your yes and what's your no. And so you can be really comfortable in your yes while you're really clear about your no. And I think it also, to me, what's so rich and wonderful about boundaries and friendships is, to me, that's when I know I can really trust somebody. When I hear no for the first time in a friendship, it sounds maybe crazy, but I actually really appreciate it. Because if somebody is willing to say no, and not just no, I'm busy that night, because that's an easy no, but no, it's been a hard week and I don't think I'm up for it. Or no, I don't really like that activity. Could we do something else? Something where they really have to put some emotional strength behind that no. Then I know that we're in an authentic connection. We're going to be honest with each other. And so I think it's really an important part of a friendship to have these kinds of discussions.
And listening to you say that, the other thought I had was that so often we wait till we feel close enough, till we've like built up all this vulnerability with a friend to set a boundary. We might go like ignore our own inner compass that's saying like, set the boundary, set the boundary. But I love what you said about you're like looking for the first time a friend tells you no or sets a boundary. And to me, my first thought was like, oh my gosh, that's such a great, I call them like small intimacies. Set a simple boundary early on. And I don't mean that as like a test or whatever. It can be pretty inconsequential. It can be pretty simple, but I do think you're right. I think a lot of people when they hear, now, not everyone, I understand this is going to probably like weed out some friendships for some people, but for a good number of people, if you set like a really simple boundary early on, it's probably a sign to maybe a newer friend that you're trying to let them in. You're trying to be honest. You're trying to be yourself. You're trying to open up. An example that comes to mind of that is I don't really love like concerts. I'm not a live music person, but I have a lot of friends who love concerts. So a really easy one would be if they invited me, because that's very kind of them, for me to say like, hey, I would love to come to dinner before, but then I'm going to head home afterwards. And that's like a really small, simple boundary to work in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could even add, I don't think you ever have to justify your boundaries at all, but you could say, I don't enjoy loud, crowded places or something so that they know going forward, okay, I'm just not even going to bother asking her about those things because I know she doesn't like loud, crowded places. Not as an apology or a justification, but just as an education, almost if it's a new person on what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah, exactly. Like sharing small details about yourself. I think you're exactly right. I would probably say something like, oh, live music just normally isn't my thing, but most of the venues aren't very far from where I live. And I would love to see everyone beforehand to kind of like keep that door open that they can let me know if they would like. And I for sure will show up for like dinner or drinks beforehand and then let them all go to the concert. We're talking about like the simple boundaries. Let's talk a little bit about when you get to a place where something's kind of like a problem has built up maybe, and you need to set what feels like a bigger boundary. Do you have any thoughts on how to approach setting those bigger boundaries?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is with love. I think all of this is done with self-love and love of the friend, or maybe if it's a new friend, it's like, but it's about the connection. If you didn't care about this person, you wouldn't even care about the boundary. You would just be out of the relationship. So with that intention on how can you take care of yourself while also maintaining the connection, if that's what you ultimately want, and building more depth, I think coming at it from that place is also good as you approach it for yourself. So instead of thinking, again, going back to the shoulds and stuff, oh, this is going to push this person away, or this is too much, this is too hard, I don't even want to deal with this conversation. If you think of it of, I am doing this to show my self-love, I'm doing this to show our connection, care, and consideration, I think that's a great place to start.
I was also thinking as you were talking that when it's a friendship that you want to keep investing in, this might be a different answer if it's one that you really just feel like your boundaries are getting crossed all the time. But if it feels like a pretty good friendship, there's setting a boundary, but I also think something that's not offered enough, especially in friendship where we're not necessarily, it's not like a romantic partner. You're not with this person all the time. They're not like anticipating your every move necessarily, is offering a yes to the friendship. Like you're talking about somebody's individual hell yes, but I love this idea of like also offering a hell yes for the relationship itself, like a bridge. So when you say, here's my boundary, also maybe giving an idea or two of how you can stay connected in some sense or find a way to make it work. What's a good example of this? I mean, kind of like the dinner concert thing. I could just say no. A bridge is offering the details of why. Another bridge is offering to go before and have dinner. Like offering ways something can work is a great way to keep investing in the friendship and not feel like you're just putting up walls all the time.
Yeah, and I actually was talking to somebody about boundaries recently, and she said, are you putting up a wall or are you putting up a bridge? And I think since you bring that up, you're giving examples of the bridges instead of this will not work, an absolute. It's, maybe this won't work for me for now. This won't work for me because I have this need. Or this is a family thing, not a friend, but I actually said, I need a pause in this connection. And let's reconnect in the future, or let's touch base so that it's not just you're out. It's right now, this isn't working for me, but let's come back together so it isn't an absolute wall. One of the biggest things is almost that the possibility of ending the friendship. And I have had, I will say, several of them over the years where I've noticed that it's a one way. And, there are times where people are busy. It's not that I'm always expecting somebody to come back. But if over time, either the person only contacts me when they're having a hard time or really barely contacts and only responds when I reach out, that's not the kind of connection I want to have with a friend. And so I've had conversations of, I love you. I love our connection. I would want this to continue. However, I want my relationships to be two ways. And that means that somebody initiates contact, they initiate plans, things like that. And that's not what I'm experiencing right now. If that's something you're interested in, I'm going to leave that to you to reach out. I won't reach out until I hear from you again. And if you don't reach out, I will take that as a sign that this relationship has run its course. And I leave it that way. So that's, I'd say, one of the toughest ones, because we're on the edge of ending the connection.
What I love about that is you being really clear about the fact that, like, I'm not going to reach out if you want this to continue. Here is the action that will make me understand you want this to continue. Like, being very clear about that. Not just saying, like, I'm frustrated that I'm always the one making contact and the end, but like giving a clear path forward, I think is so important to call out in the example you just gave. And I think is so important. And one that, again, a lot of people miss, I think, especially in friendship. Like, we're not with all of our friends all the time enough to be able to like read their mind on what we hope their actions are. I know we might think it's super clear, but just spell it out. Just make it easy. Like, especially if you want this friendship to potentially continue, maybe at that point. In that one, maybe you don't.
I mean, I appreciate that you're pulling out the clarity, because that's actually one of my tips overall, is to be really explicit. In my consulting career, I always said leaders want to do the right thing. It's my job to just make it easy for them. So I would actually hand them, here are your speaking notes, go say this. Obviously they put it in their own words. And this is a different thing, but I think it's the same thing. To your point, people are not in each other's minds, and we all deal with things differently. Like when I was just having a hard time, at some point, I really needed a lot of calls and texts. My mom was in the hospital, and so I was with her all day, and I needed connection. And so I texted my friends and family and said, I'm really struggling. I really need connection. Please call me and text me, knowing that I won't necessarily call back, but receiving it is meaningful. Then after I got home, I was so overwhelmed from the situation that I then texted and said, I love you. I appreciate everything you offered. I'm needing quiet. Now, I don't know, that could come off as high maintenance, but I actually think that people appreciate the clarity versus guessing. Let's say grief, loss, hard times, especially, people have different needs around these challenging times. And I think those are the ones that are harder to navigate in a friendship. Some people want a lot of touch. Some people don't want anything. We often don't even know what to say or what to do for them. And so having that conversation of, I love you, I want to support you, I'm not really clear what you want right now, can you help me understand, opens it up and lets them express their needs and their boundaries. They may say, you know what, please do some shopping for me and leave it at the door because I can't talk to anybody, but I need that help. Or they could say, please come sleep over. Who knows what, total extremes. And if you're left guessing, you're most likely going to guess wrong, because we are all so unique in what we need. And as I just shared, situation to situation, our needs change. So there's no way that you could know what somebody needs. And sharing these boundaries, sharing these needs is really what makes it easy to have a more peaceful connection.
Yeah, I talk a lot about it on the podcast. Like, if you are the friend that needs to show up for somebody, tips and tricks for that, like writing it down in your calendar, setting an alarm to remind yourself to send a message, right? But like you're saying, I don't talk about it enough from the flip side of, if you are the person who needs that, being very clear and explicit and asking for exactly what you want or need, or the boundaries. Because like you were saying, I mean, I just really think that in order to be able to anticipate and show up for someone without being clearly told, it has to be someone that you're spending like an extreme amount of time with. And maybe you're spending that amount of time with friends, I mean, I love that if you're listening to this and that's you. But in different seasons of life, you're not living with your friends. You are not seeing them every day. You're going extended periods of time not talking to each other. So unless you have like so much information because you're so present with someone every day, it's very unlikely that everybody around you knows how to show up for you. And
Absolutely.
just like speaking your yes, offering the ways to show up instead of needing to later put up boundaries that say, I know you tried, but that was a no. I want to tie a few things together here. In the intro to this episode, I talked a little bit about how friendship is a choice. And because it is a choice, sometimes I think that we have a hard time trusting this relationship. Because of that, we test it. And boundaries are a huge place where we are testing our friendships. Now, I think that these tests especially happen in the big, stressful, transitional moments of life. One of those transitions where I have a specific example I want to share is somebody having a baby. When this happens, we have expectations for how our friends and our community will show up for us. And maybe those unspoken expectations are met. And when they are, that is great, right? Our friends read our mind. They knew us so well. But what I'm saying here in this section of the episode is maybe instead of using this as a test, we just get really upfront and we ask for what we want. We offer up our expectations as bridges. And that allows us to be more proactive, right? Instead of having these big new life transition moments like having a baby and just constantly having to say, oh, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Thank you for that offer, but I don't want that. Instead of a bunch of no's, you could offer up ways for people to show up for you. And I have a very specific example related to somebody having a baby. Now, this friend of mine, her kiddo is, in school now. So this was a while ago, but she was constantly having to set boundaries and give those no. Nope, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And she was just hoping that people would shuffle and find the right ways, according to her, the ways she expected to show up. And she was really frustrated because she was like, this is so much energy of just having to tell people that's not the right way, or I can't use that help. That's actually not helpful. But the thing is, these people love you. They care about you. So what if you showed them the doors, showed them the ways? My suggestion for her in this situation she was in was to create a note on her phone that she then shared with her people. And she could list a bunch of things on there that she could use help with. And this is dependent on an Apple device environment. I'm not exactly positive how we do this on an Android, although I am sure we can figure it out. But basically the idea is when you share a note on an Apple device, if somebody edits the note, you get a notification. And so if this is shared with your family, your siblings, your closest friends, I would challenge you to even share it with a broader group of people, but I get that that's a lot of vulnerability. You could do things like add the ways that people can actually show up for you. When they say, instead of them sending that message, it's like, hey, let me know if I can do anything. They can be going about their day, get this notification, look at the ways that you've added to the list, decide if they have capacity for that. And if they do, message you and say, hey, I saw you added. I can handle that for you. Now, what might she put on the list? There's so many things. She could say, I could use a meal on Friday. Can somebody take my car to get the oil changed? I need somebody to walk the dog in the morning on Thursday. There is a 2-hour window where childcare for our second kiddo is now a problem. She could put whatever she wants. She could put something as simple as, can somebody pick up coffee creamer? I would really love coffee creamer tomorrow morning when I have barely slept. Put something on there about I've had a really lonely day. Could somebody stop by this week and sit with me for an hour? Can somebody vacuum my living room? Whatever you want. And every time you add to this list, it gets a notification sent to your people. And now we are using the energy to direct people to the ways that would be helpful instead of using our energy to constantly tell people no. So another question I have is, I kind of asked you this about like when there's some big boundary that you feel like you have to set, but similar but different. What about when you were okay with something for a while and you have realized that it's a pattern? Like you were okay with maybe having that conversation or doing that thing a few times, but now you're like, nothing's changed and we're repeating. Do you have any tips for boundaries when you're in that situation?
Two things come to mind. One is a family situation, so it's not exactly the same, and one is a friendship. But the family, I'll just share just because from a wording perspective, it's what I just briefly mentioned. I realized that with this family member, we were just stuck in this unhealthy loop where that person wasn't showing up in a way that I would expect, like not responding to texts, never reaching out, that one-way thing that as a friend, we'd cut them off, or I would cut them off. With a family member, there's a little more leeway, but I would get hurt. We would discuss it and around and around. And I finally just said, we're stuck in an unhealthy pattern that we can't get out of. I can't continue like this. I need to put a pause in this relationship. Now, there's a little bit of a wall there because I didn't say, and let's discuss it in the future, because I really needed a hard break at that point and just a stop. And, have since reached out and said, okay, we can maybe discuss this, but I will not continue our relationship in the way that it was. It needs to be different. We need to have a discussion. We are not just going to jump back into connection without a really careful consideration. Another one is like a friend the two things come to mind. One is somebody who used to just contact me when they were in need, and another who was really negative. And I know I'm not Pollyanna, everything is not positive. I don't want to be somebody who tells their friends that they have to just put on a smile. But when it gets to be all the time that's the only thing that they were doing, it wears on me. And so with both of them, it's the same as the simpler ones in that it's expressing what the need is from my perspective. So it's not, you're always negative and I can't take this. It's, I'm really sensitive. And when you're negative around me, it does tend to wear me down because I care about you and I don't like to see you suffering. Can we talk about something else? What are we grateful for right now? Or what can we do to solve the problem that you're talking about? So instead of just harping on the negative, try and shift it around, but owning the situation. And similar with the friend that used to contact me only for hard times. It was, I'm sorry that you're struggling. I care about you, but I also want to hear from you in the good times. I want to celebrate your wins. I want to cheer you on. I want to laugh with you. Let's figure out how we can make this a more even connection, that it's not only those times that you're struggling.
So you said something in there and earlier that I don't hear very many people talk about, but I talk about it as well. And that is the idea of a friendship pause. Tell me a little bit more about a friendship pause. I'm a big proponent of friendship pauses. So give me your take.
Yeah, I've never put it in those words. They've happened. And I think it's easier if it's a longer friendship. If you have something that's shorter and you're already taking a pause, then maybe you need to question, is this one that I want to invest in? But for those longer ones where history is one of the things that's keeping you together, I think the pause gives you both time to step back and really think about what's important to you for yourself. What's important to you in this connection? What are you willing and interested in accepting from this person? And then it also gives you enough space to say, do you want to restart it? Or is this pause going to be a long-term situation? So it's not surprising in the political climate in the US, but my oldest friend and I are complete opposite ends of the political spectrum. And over the years, she's made comments that I just ignore because I'm not getting into it. And then again, not surprising, the Trump years really brought it to a head because they were just much more extreme. And it got to the point where we had to say, that's it, no political conversations. And then there was one time that something came up, and that was it. We just had to take a break because we were both just getting so frustrated and agitated. And it really helped me to see we have very different values. This isn't just politics. Do I want to be in connection with somebody who values things that are so opposite what I truly stand for? And so that pause really allowed me to step back and think about what is friendship? What is friendship with this person? What do I value in a friend? What do I value with her? And then come back at things knowing that I took that time for myself and for her instead of just pushing through or instead of pushing her away, which I will say have been patterns of mine in the past. I could go into self-protection mode, walls up, you're out, see ya, you hurt my feelings, we're done. But over the years, I have shifted away from that.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people listening are going to identify with that. And I think a lot of people jump there, especially in friendship, because it's funny. I think, there's all these messages kind of out there about like, oh, well, if the friendship's not right, just end it, which is why I want to talk about the pause, because I think a lot of people just jump to that like self-preservation end it mode. But what I find funny about that is then on the flip side, people seem to view friendships quite often as kind of disposable. And then people are out there talking about how hard it is to find friends, how hard it is to make friends. And so you're doing the work either way. Like option one, you are navigating a pause, navigating boundary conversations. And like that's work. I'm not saying that's easy. Sometimes that's very hard, but it's work. There's also end it, mourn the friendship, possibly make new friends. That's also a lot of work. Or option three, which is end it, don't make new friends, and then navigate, doing all these things alone and potentially feeling a little lonely that you're missing out on friends. All are hard. It's like pick your hard. And to me, not that I'm saying keep a bunch of friendships because you have a bunch of history with them, but if overall you generally like enjoy this friendship and something has come up that you can't figure out what the bridge is there, like your example with politics. In my case, a very distinct friendship pause that I had one time was a friend who had a family issue, like a frustration with her family. And every time we got together, it was just the same vent sesh over and over and over and over again. I mean, I went months with this. And at a certain point, I just told her like, hey, I love you. We've been friends a really long time, but I think we need to take a break. Like I truly think we need to take some time to not see each other, not talk to each other. And I will reach back out to you in a few months. But like the reason I think we need a break is because I think I've become this person that you just retell the same story to. And, like maybe you need to talk to your therapist about this. Maybe you need to talk to your family about this. Maybe you need to have these conversations with someone else. And I know you trust me and that's why you just keep coming back to me. But like, this isn't getting you anywhere either. And I love you and I want you to get yourself out of this pattern. And I called very distinctly for a pause. But I don't hear very many people, like I love that you're talking about it because I don't hear very many people talking about friendship pauses. Like there's this idea that friendship just should get better and better and better and better and better. And if it doesn't, then something's wrong with it. When in reality, I think pauses are happening, moments where you're not necessarily going up, but kind of going down because you're trying to navigate some sort of problem. I'm just here for more conversations about friendship pauses because I think they would save a lot of friendships.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I was saying earlier that boundaries aren't discussed very much in friendships. It is similar to pause. The intimate relationships, it's not uncommon at all to say we need to take some time off. We need to take a break, not even a full separation, but let's not talk for a few weeks. We're at an impasse. It's totally not uncommon. And same thing even with family. I'll say that it's, I need some space. I need some distance. We just don't talk about it. There seems to be, like you're saying, these different expectations around friendships, that they're supposed to be easy and joyful. And there's still relationships, and relationships take work, to your point, and they can be tricky. And we are still two people coming together with different needs, with different traumas, with different situations, different priorities that need to be navigated. And so to have different assumptions on how this type of relationship should work being so different than what we expect from other things, I think puts undue pressure on it. Because then when these things come up, it's, it shouldn't be like this. A friendship's supposed to be easy. Why am I struggling? Or I can't possibly, to your point, ask for a pause. That's ridiculous. I just have to power through. Or the opposite, I'll just avoid this person and maybe they'll get the hint. We try to work around just dealing with the situation.
For anybody out there that's like wondering if these really are the messages you're receiving about friendship until you listen to this podcast and whatnot, if you think about it, there's all this stuff out there like, well, a real friend would never, or a true friend would just know, or real friends should be easy. Like there are a lot of these catchphrases out there that people throw around. And unless you really examine those are the expectations you have quite often, because you haven't put the thought in to question that and say, is that really the case? Because that's the other thing I think is interesting is quite often we're out here, with let's say a friendship that's 2 decades old. And we will use the amount of time we've been friends with someone as like a marker of how successful it is. Like, oh, well, we've been friends for 2 decades. But what you're not saying in there is for a couple of years when you lived on opposite ends of the country, you barely talked, that you got that huge fight. And for 6 months, all your conversations were pretty surface level and things felt weird and you didn't know what was going on, that some big life change happened and everything felt different. But we're just like not talking about it. So even those friendships that you might be out there looking at saying like, oh, those are real friendships, true friendships. They're just easy. That's how they've lasted. Like, are they really? Because if you give me 30 minutes with a lot of people, we can dig up the moments where that friendship didn't feel very good. Like that's happening to everyone. We just need to normalize that.
Yeah, I appreciate you having these conversations because, again, I just said it, but friendships are relationships and there are challenges. And maybe we also don't want to think about it because, in some places we need the easy button, right? Work may be hard. Family life can be challenging. Health, all these things. We have other areas that are challenging. And it'd be nice to think, well, friendship is that one place that I can lean on that's always going to be easy. And unfortunately, sorry, I don't think there's an easy button.
There's not an easy button. I will say there are friendships I've had that are simpler or they just seem to fit. Like that's not to say these don't exist. But if you and I really had a conversation about those, there are also all those hard moments too. It's just easy to glaze over them. So not to say every friendship is going to be really, really difficult to navigate. It's definitely not what I'm trying to say.
Just one clarification. When I say there's not going to be an easy button, I'm not trying to say that friendship needs to be challenging. I'm just saying, like you were saying earlier, there is work involved. So there is that sharing your deep emotions. That's not necessarily easy for everybody in all situations. And yet, in order to have that great conversation, you do, if you want to get deeper, you are going to be sharing yourself with that person or even sharing your opinions. There are just things that come up in a connection that potentially will be more challenging, that you're sharing a hard time, you're sharing your vulnerability, all of those things too. So I'm not saying that the connection itself needs to be hard or that there's no easy path. It's just, this is a relationship. And as you yourself deepen and as the connection deepens, there are just things that are more challenging as well to navigate.
Yeah. It's just, we're all becoming new versions of ourselves all the time. And each time we are a new version of ourselves, that requires new boundaries, new ways we spend time together, new things we talk about. And any change or transition requires a little work to adapt to the new normal. And in my experience, the moment that you kind of get that new normal, it's not very long before things change again and you're navigating boundaries and change. So it's really just, in my mind, it's like a constant practice of getting good at doing this and doing it early. And like you were saying, doing it in a loving way and trying to find those bridges. Once you get used to doing it, it's like a muscle. You're setting your boundaries muscle. Zya, I really appreciate you being here and talking about boundaries. Like we said, a conversation not many people are having. Do you have any final thoughts for people who are maybe now sitting there, like wondering how they're doing with their own boundaries and their friendships?
Well, first off, I'd say just be kind to yourself. This is not a chance to sit back and say, oh gosh, I've been doing it wrong and I'm not a good friend and I put up with too much. Any criticism, let's just put that aside. That is definitely not the direction. It's maybe to look at things with excitement and curiosity on what is possible. How could I do things differently? What if? What if I showed up differently? What if I shared this? And start small. It could just be, again, like the example I gave earlier, I'm a morning person and I leave the ringer on my phone in case my family needs me. Just mentioning, hey, I'd prefer if you don't call before 10 a.m. or text before 10 a.m., things like that. So start with little things so that you become comfortable and you start to build those muscles, right? You don't go to the gym and start lifting 50 pounds. You go in and lift the 5 pound. And are you going to potentially fumble a few times? Sure. Don't worry about it. Again, this is something that happens when you're learning. Maybe in a moment, somebody is frustrating you. And instead of saying, here's what I need, you say, well, you do blah, 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 right? And you make it a blaming thing. Well, that's not ideal. But then turning around and blaming yourself for doing it badly is not ideal either. So I think self-kindness, self-care, curiosity, and just knowing that it's just a new skill that you're learning and you're doing it with the intention of having deeper, richer, more authentic connections for the rest of your life. So what an exciting thing to dive into. Who doesn't want that?
I think that's a great way to end this episode. And what an inspiring way. It'll feel awkward at first, maybe. You'll get better. And the long-term goal is these rich relationships in your life, which in my mind is a huge prize worth doing the work.
And a big old hell yes.
And a big old hell yes. Zya, thank you again for being here. Can you tell our listeners where to find you?
I am on Facebook more than I'm on Instagram. On Instagram, Zya, Zya.be, is where I have a lot of my art, and I'm starting to put some things about the podcast there as well. The podcast is Your Hell Yes Life, or yourhellyeslife.net will take you directly there, but it is on most podcast platforms. And I also have a group called Your Hell Yes Life on Facebook for women to connect and share sisterhood as we work through some of these exciting and challenging times.
In community, and that's so important. Zya, thanks again for being here, and I'm really excited to share this conversation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I want to leave you with a couple of key takeaways, at least what I'm taking away. First and foremost, say the thing. Don't leave your friends guessing. Be honest and upfront. And the earlier you communicate your feelings or boundaries, the fewer misunderstandings there will be. Secondly, take some time to inspect your own boundaries. Sometimes the boundaries we've set in the past served us then, but they might be holding us back now. It is okay to reassess and adjust. We're all growing and changing, so are our boundaries. Now, if you have more questions about boundaries in friendships or specific situations, I would love to hear them. It is so much easier for me to talk this through with real life examples than it is to just conjure up some generic situations in my brain. So send them my way. DM, voice memo, email. There's so many ways you can get a hold of me. Don't tell me you can't get a hold of me. I'm available in all these places. Now, I love offering some further reading. So if you are interested in exploring this topic more, I highly recommend the book, Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab. It is a fantastic resource that really dives into boundaries in all areas of your life, including friendship. A big thank you to my guest, Zya Be, for being here today. And thank you all for hanging out. I know that this boundaries conversation was one that many of you have wanted on the podcast. It will definitely not be the last. With that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle @it's Alex Alexander. Or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.